Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here and speak to you all today. When Kyung and the rest of his co-workers described the ambitions of their project here in Anyang, it made me want to begin my presentation with this quotation. And this was written by a group called the Situationists in France. And I believe that it's a very cynical statement, and a statement that one can understand the reasons for the disillusionment expressed in this statement, but everything that I want to describe to you here today is against this statement. Urban planning as the organization of participation in something in which it is impossible to participate. I think the background to the statement is an understanding of power that understands power to be completely monolithic and unchangeable and unporous to democratic action. And I think that while one might see many struggles in the past that have fallen short, still one can actually draw much strength and hope from many things that have happened to say that this statement is not an accurate definition of urban planning. One of the biggest examples in the history of the United States that perhaps supports this statement while undermining it is the history of something called urban renewal. And urban renewal was a program of the federal government in the United States that started in 1949. And the basic idea was this. This is kind of an urban renewal machine to explain how it works. First, a city, any city, would examine itself and find the parts of itself that were the most messed up. The word that was used for this at the time was blighted. And so if you look down here in the corner, this is a map that was produced of New York City with all of the areas that were blighted colored in black. Next, once these areas were identified, the federal government would come and give the city a lot of money to go in and either buy this land or take it from people, giving them some kind of compensation. And that's what the site acquisition is. Next, everyone that lived there would be moved away. The site would be completely leveled. Then the land would be sold to a private company to redevelop the land. And then that company, in theory at least, would redevelop the land in accordance with a plan that had been produced by the public, by the government. And the motivating ideology behind all of this was that it would produce the city without a ghetto. It would produce an ideal city by removing the cancer or the problems of the city. And across the city, and across New York City especially, tremendous areas, thousands and thousands of acres were cleared. And these are just two projects. This is one in Brooklyn. And you can see that the traditional urban fabric was completely lifted and erased, and a new modernist fabric was put in its place. This one's in Manhattan. Now, while in some ways this produced the visual impact that its designers were interested in, at the same time, it created a large reputation for injustice. Urban renewal became known as Negro removal because of its differential impact across races in the United States. It was seen as a way to remove black people from valuable property and make them move somewhere else. And in response to these protests against urban renewal were the 1990s. And these notions of public hearing and democratic planning were still very much at the center. However, if one was interested in these kinds of mechanisms, public hearings and so on, one could go there and find out that oftentimes the public was not so much in presence at the public hearing. And this kind of a scene is not so uncommon. Yet, there also grew up an entire ecology of nonprofit and community-based organizations that were very attached to questions of place. And so whether it was protests around the location of power plants or questions about the economic inclusivity of neighborhoods, whether neighborhoods were being created to only house a certain class of people or people of a certain income. The fact that there are these mechanisms that exist, the fact that there is a ceaseless amount of activity around the future of places creates an amazing opportunity for designers and architects and artists to insert themselves and find new uses for all of these situations. I believe very strongly that the city is our greatest educational artifact, that forces that give it shape, trying to use the tools of design and art to give people more of an access into the democratic process of creating the place where they live. So in a very simple way, as an example, this right here is an abandoned courthouse in the South Bronx in New York City. And by following the very basic process that any designer goes through to look at something that exists and then try to imagine how it might be different. So in this case, as a homeless shelter, or a wrap factory, or a center for Dominican culture, people from the Dominican Republic, one can begin to imagine how the world might change, and then ideally begin to investigate how that change might be made real. So now I'm going to tell you about three separate projects that try to do this objective in a variety of ways. The first one is an exhibition that just happened this past summer called the Red Lines Housing Crisis Learning Center. And to start this, I actually want to show you a brief clip of a video.
Between buyers and sellers. That's when the person who sold the securities actually contacts the buyer and tells them these are the actual pools of mortgage-backed securities that we're going to deliver against the TBA that we traded in the prior month.
Actually, it's really impossible to totally secure property. If there's somebody who really wants to get in, they will get in. You know, the first thing that people do, lock the door, well, that's just a waste of time. Then they do the boards, which will keep out the casual, you know, the kids who just want to get in, but not much else.
So those were two people that I met when I was trying to understand the connection between buildings and the global financial crisis that I'm sure you all are very familiar about here. And the goal was to try to understand how buildings, which seem to be such physical and solid things, somehow came to be at the center of an enormous crisis in the financial system of the world. And the result of this research was an installation at, most recently, the Queens Museum of Art in New York City that tried to take these very abstract issues and make them more accessible through kind of a playground for adults. And so to give you a sense of how this project came about and how research led into an actual physical installation, it really began with a series of spam emails. I'm not sure if you all got these kinds of emails back in say like 2005 and 2006, but I was constantly getting these junk emails about there being money available, cheap money to borrow to build houses or to buy your house or improve your house. And I became very curious then about the operation of real estate. And as an architect, one learns a lot about the technical construction of buildings, also about the potential significance of the shapes of buildings, but one doesn't necessarily learn very much about the business operations that go on behind buildings. And so I just started doing very simple things like visiting real estate offices and talking to the people that work there. Attending real estate classes. This is at the Harvard Business School in 2007, right before the crash, and so it was kind of ironic that they had this slide up there. I also learned a lot about some amazing histories in the United States that I had never learned about before. This is a picture of a conference that was held in 1972 in Chicago, Illinois, where people from neighborhoods all across the country had come together to talk about issues that they saw happening in their neighborhoods. And most specifically, they were interested in the issue of money being available to improve